Hello, beautiful people. In today's episode, I get the pleasure of speaking to Nicolas Cole. And Nicolas has had such an interesting story. He was one of the highest ranked World of Warcraft players when he was a teenager. He got into competitive bodybuilding a little bit later on. And then he had an injury, which he discusses in this podcast, that forced him to reshape his life and go in a completely different direction. And he decided to go in the direction of writing, and he eventually became a top writer on Quora. Now he has his own writing agency. We got into his whole story. We got into the highs, the lows, and you really get a sense for who Nicolas is in this episode. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it because Nicolas gave his heart in this episode and really laid it all out on the line. And if you enjoy it, let me know on Twitter. @HeyDannyMiranda is where to find me. Without further ado, let's get to it.
Interesting people, thought-provoking conversations, nutrition for your brain. Journey through the minds of the world's top performers and discover what it really takes to achieve your highest version. This is the Danny Miranda Podcast.
Tell everyone a little bit about yourself for anyone who is unfamiliar with Nicolas Cole.
Let's see. Well, the starting point is I wrote a lot on Quora about my background as a gamer. I was one of the highest ranked World of Warcraft players as a teenager, if that's anything to be proud of. And then, I got into bodybuilding after that. Went to school for creative writing. Ended up working in advertising for a handful of years. Then ended up seeing this interesting trend happening where, influencer marketing was really taking off in, 2012-ish. Ended up realizing that I was getting a lot more traction on my own writing than all of the biggest clients that we were working with at this ad agency. Quit my job, ended up building a company called Digital Press. We worked with 300 plus different founders and executives and everybody from, Olympic athletes and Grammy winners to Silicon Valley investors, and grew that to a couple $1 million business in like 18 months. And I ghostwrite for a ton of people, and I'm a writer myself. And yeah, it's a path that makes absolutely no linear sense, but the common thread is storytelling.
All the dots connect on the way back, right? As Steve Jobs would say.
Yeah.
So one of the things, so let's start with the writing, because people who listen to this podcast might be writers, and I personally want to know this as well. I read that you write 10,000 words every single day. At least I read that on a Quora post of yours. And I don't know if you're still doing this, but when you're writing 10,000 words a day, that's not normal. And that is treating your profession as a craft, as opposed to just something you do for fun as an amateur. So talk a little bit about why you made this benchmark of 10,000 words a day, or talk a little bit about that in general.
So I'll tell you, at this point, it's probably more. And actually, and you bring up a good point. I actually really don't pay any attention at all to word count. I think it's a horrible judge of value. I write a lot. I really like giving back, and I didn't really have someone telling me a lot of the things that I now believe or have learned as truth for myself, just through experience and years of doing this. But when I graduated college with a degree in creative writing, it was really a degree in fiction writing. The only career paths that people really told me about were you can either go work at a newspaper, you can be a barista and try and write the next great American novel and probably fail and be poor your entire life. Or, you can go work for like a magazine or a book publisher or at a library. There really weren't people pointing out a lot of the things that I ended up discovering. And so one of the things that I really try and pass along to other writers, and this holds true for, I think, every industry if you draw the parallel, but for writers especially, like, you should never be valuing your work based on the number of words. Anytime a writer says to me, like, how much should I be charging? Right now I charge 25 cents per word. I'm like, you're thinking in the wrong direction, because what you've done, and I talk about this in the book. I don't know if you've gotten here, but if you think about that, like, 7 words is not just universally equal to all 7 words are the same, right? Like, I can say a sentence that's really, really valuable to someone, or I can just say 7 to 10 random words. And that doesn't mean those 2 sentences are equal in value. Like, the value comes from thinking and communicating clearly. And the more clearly you can communicate, the more value that holds, the more valuable it is, the more people are willing to pay for it. So when I judge my own writing, I really don't ever say to myself, oh, this is only 500 words, it should be 700, or this is only 30,000 words, it should be 50,000. If I'm saying what I want to say in the way that it needs to be said, then that's all that matters. And most of the time, it's actually the opposite. I don't want it to be longer. I actually want it to be shorter because, as I talk about all the time, and especially writing on the internet, like, people's attention spans are very short. So the goal should never be, how can I write more words? The goal should be, how can I write the most valuable, impactful, densely based, packed, created statements and messages. And then after the fact, sure, if I count everything that I wrote in a day, it's probably more than 10,000 words, but I don't benchmark against that number.
What do you benchmark for? Is it number of hours? Is it focus work? What is that benchmark that you're looking for, if any?
Yeah, I really try, like, I've learned over the years, especially just with my own writing, it's got to be a minimum of 2 hours a day. I really aim for closer to 3 to 4 focused hours. That's for, like, my own personal stuff. But I mean, I was thinking about this last night. I was walking my dog at 9:30 last night, and I was just going through my day. I mean, yesterday is a great example. I was up at 6 a.m. I was writing my own stuff from 6:15 to 9 a.m. Then I was working on a messaging project for a big company, still writing, still using words for another 3 or 4 hours, took a break, then ghost wrote, two pieces for different executives. That was a couple more hours, read, made dinner, wrote something else, and like by the time the day is done and I was walking my dog, like I said, I was like, okay, I've legitimately sat here and I've clocked 10 plus hard hours of writing today. And I truthfully do that like 6, usually 7 days a week. Like it's very, very consistently that.
And so this leads me to ask you, what is the vision? Why are you going so hard? And is this just like your natural calling? Is this, you want to be the greatest of all time? Like what is it that's fueling you for your grand vision?
Greatest all time would be cool. But yeah, to be honest, it's just my personality. Like when I'm really connected to something, I live it, breathe it, obsess about it, care about it, want to get better at it. But a lot of it's just fueled by curiosity. Like, I'll take on projects very often just because I'm curious, just because I want to see if I can do it or if it can teach me something. But yeah, I have a lot of aspiration around me just wanting to see what my potential is as a writer and how diverse it can be. I write a lot of different things. I've written for a lot of different people. I read a lot of different topics. I enjoy a wide spectrum of interests. So, I've kind of been pivoting lately for the past few years. My goal was a little simpler. It was just, I want to be the most read writer on the internet. And in a lot of ways, I accomplished that. I achieved things that very, very, very few people do or even know is possible by writing online. And I kind of reached this point where I was like, okay, no, me writing more articles isn't going to move me further. Like I've written thousands at this point. So I have to change the goal. And, my dream's always just been writing books. And so now, because this is, I'm obsessed with doing things differently. I don't like, if the game's already been defined, I'm bored. Like I really like doing things that other people say is impossible, or other people just don't imagine as clearly. Because that, to me, that's the whole curiosity. That's what I enjoy exploring. And so the big thing that I've really realized is just how kind of unfair the whole book publishing world is. And you have a system that's engineered to buy up a lot of really talented work, but it doesn't really reward the authors. Most of the time these writers are giving up 85+% of their product for a small advance that then the publisher basically says they have to use to market the book that they now no longer own. So, and this happens everywhere. And then the every once in a while you get the random, author that has the home run, and it makes it seem like that's the dream, and everyone should aspire for this book publishing contract future. But the more and more you look at it across every industry, ownership is what matters. And it's the creators and the artists that are able to invest in themselves for a long enough period of time where then they prove that future is possible. And then they end up out earning everybody else by a factor of 10. And the only thing it requires is you to just be really patient with yourself for a long time. You have to give up that instant gratification of saying, oh, I'm signed to a major publishing house. So that's a long-winded way of saying that is what I want to do. And that's what I want to prove for writers, and show that there's this other path that is completely viable and you can do it yourself.
So you're basically trying to do what Kanye is currently trying to do for the music industry.
I did a whole Twitter thread on that. But yeah, like he ran around a couple weeks ago and was like, I'm going to talk about how ridiculous all of these music contracts are. And the exact same thing. To be honest, book publishing is as, if not more, predatory. I mean, our authors have nothing. They get so little. And then if you are the outlier case, even still, even if you're an author, like I'm obsessed with the concept of opportunity cost. It's like, even if you get $1 million advance, that's amazing. But are you even stopping to consider that maybe possibly that could have been 10 million if you had done it yourself? And I find that to be a jarring question. Like, $1 million is great, but if I knew that I could have had 10, then all of a sudden I'm kind of like, I made a mistake.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what I wanted to talk to you about, kind of on the same idea, is a few different writers that I look up to. And it seems as if the way in which you're talking about writing online in your book is slightly different than the way some of these writers have operated. So I want you to kind of talk about maybe what James Clear, David Perel, Nat Eliason, I don't know if you're familiar with all these names, but it's like, what are they doing differently, and what are they doing wrong maybe, or what would you suggest a different path? Talk a little bit about your thinking versus their thinking in the approach. And this might be a nuanced question for people listening, but I'm very curious about the answer.
Yeah, so the way that I try and frame this in the book too is there are multiple paths to success. There are. The biggest problem that I found, even just with my own journey and my own writing, and then I always like to really gut check my own theories because, it's great if it works for me, but does it work for other people too? And so all throughout this journey, I would take things to my friends, or, then we built a business and I would test things out with clients. I was always trying to make sure it's not just me. This works universally. And the number one problem that I realized like almost without fail, every single person was running into is they thought they knew what they wanted to write about, and they really didn't. And the way that I learned that for myself is through a lot of practice and by getting feedback in the form of data. So the more that I wrote on Quora in the beginning and then Medium and these other places, the more these platforms and the engagement that audience members would give me, that told me what was working. And then over time, I started to realize that a lot of the things that I started with that I thought, this is what I want to write about, this is what I think people want to hear about from me, data started telling me that that wasn't really true. It was when I, told stories like this, or I framed it more about life advice as opposed to this. Like, data was giving me those answers. The problem that I see with other people, kind of like I'm generally familiar with, James Clear and Dave Perel and, some of the other people that still live by and use this language of you should have a blog. The problem that I see, and there's not a lot of discussion around this, is that there's really a step that comes before that. And those theories or those growth strategies, those writing techniques that these other people share, I still think there's a lot of truth to them, but they kind of only work if you're operating from a place of understanding to begin with. And I find that the vast majority of time, people aren't starting there. They're starting from a place of either they're so convicted in what it is they think that people want to hear about, or they're really shy and they're really timid and afraid to put themselves out there. And so they want a safer environment so that they don't have to get that feedback and data. So a blog is a safer environment. It's a lot, it's very different than putting something on social media where you're going to immediately know if people agree or disagree with you. So my whole thesis and everything is based around, in order to have the answer to that question, you need data. In order to get data faster, you need environments that give you data faster. The environments that do that are social. If you can use social to get answers to those questions, by the time you then decide down the road, I want to build my own site, or I want to, have products that I can sell, and I want to drive people to my blog and all of those things, those decisions then are not based on your own just gut feeling. They're based on, pieces and content and years and data and things that are actually validating what you're thinking. And that's the part that I find a lot of people don't talk about.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is, because you're such a long-term thinker, and it's clear from your book that you also simultaneously kind of, at least in the way it's outlined from the book and what I've read, is you discount search engine optimization, SEO, and because you want your name out in more places. Why exactly is that the strategy, to discount SEO and just blast your name basically to other publications, if I have that correct?
Yeah, it's a multi-layered question. So for one, this has become, I've been thinking about this a lot, especially recently in just things I've been reading. But I've really learned that it is far more important to understand what game you're playing rather than trying to expend as much energy as possible all the time, just playing the game and just going through the motions. The most obvious example I see with this is, like, for years, I thought that I needed to have a Facebook and a Twitter and a Snapchat and an Instagram and a, whatever. And I needed to maintain them all. And real growth for me changed when I stopped trying to do that. And I said, I'm not going to care about anything else except writing on Quora. I'm going to pick one platform and dominate it. And that's what happened. And once you dominate a platform, it becomes a lot easier to then move that attention and move the skills that you gain in the process over to another and then another. Like, the reason why I've only been experimenting with Twitter for the past like couple months, honestly. Like it's just been a republishing, passive platform in the background, and I like basically never really used it. And I've started playing with it over the past couple months, and there's a reason why almost immediately I've started doing these threads and they've gone viral. And that's because I've learned those skills by writing 1,000+ articles on Quora over 4 or 5 years. So understanding what game you're playing and mastering that game is really, really important. And there's a big part of me that knows SEO is a very different type of game. And it's also not a game that I'm really interested in playing. SEO is not about writing. SEO is about understanding search algorithms and backlinks and getting other sites to point to your site. And, yes, do you need to have good content? Yeah, of course. But like at the end of the day, the SEO game puts rankings above quality of writing, period. So because I know that that's not really the game that I want to play or that I'm interested in, my strategies are about taking the game that I do want to play, which is I love writing. I want to write valuable things. Those things are most likely not going to rank. I don't always write opinion columns or articles because I'm like, oh, I really want to rank for the keyword millennial life advice. That's not how I think about it. So if I know I'm not playing that game, then my strategies and tactics need to be about, well, what game am I playing and how can I maximize that? And so because I'm playing a different game, the best way to take advantage of that is to not care about SEO, throw it out the window, realize that that's not really my goal, and how else can I maximize viewership? And so, and then in the book, I put a whole handful of things that you can do.
Yeah, I love the idea that you know what game you're playing and you're not saying SEO is wrong. It's just not where you want to focus your attention. And I think that's really important. And I also love what you said about just focusing on one thing in the beginning, or focusing on one thing so that you could translate to another area. I think so often we feel as if we need to, as a creator, you need to be everywhere. But when you do that, you sometimes don't maximize getting really good at one. And once you get really good at one, like you said, you can translate that to another area.
Yep.
So one thing that I wanted to ask you about was about how specifically you track your writing. Do you have any method, like a spreadsheet or anything like that, or a template that you use to track all of the inputs and like, okay, I wrote this amount this day and it was about this topic. Do you have any tracking method that any writer could use to just think about their writing or to track their writing?
I don't, but I say that and share that as a positive. Because again, success is always about foundational stuff. It's very basic stuff. It's never, I was doing another podcast, I think last week, and like everyone always wants to have the conversations around what are the best growth hacks and how do I go from 0 to 100 overnight, and but there's really little discussion or focus around the basics that allow those things to even happen in the first place. And so I emphasize, especially to a lot of other people and writers that are just starting out, that you can spend all day creating spreadsheets and finding ways to track things. And I did a lot of that early on too. I was like obsessed with just, if I don't go about this perfectly, it's not going to work. And then over time, like most things, I started to realize that there was only one thing that moved the needle, period. Everything else was just ancillary. And the one thing was I wrote a Quora answer every day. That's it. And if I did that all by itself, if all I did was just write my Quora answer for the day and I was consistent day after day, week after week, month after month, I beat everyone. And it wasn't even a question of necessarily talent. I think I have some innate talent, but my real gift is work ethic. It's the fact that I am willing to be consistent 7 days a week, 12 months out of the year, 5 years, 10 years, like I will do that. Mm-hmm. So I share that because if it was as easy as, just download my weekly writing template and then you'll have everything too. Like this book, you had said you're about halfway through it. Like I really sat there and was like, how can I engineer as many just get rich quick writing principles, right? Like that's basically what it is. It's like, you want to cut the corner. You want to have 10 years compressed into 6 months. Like I'm going to give you as many models as possible. But the thing that I keep stressing over and over again is none of it matters if you are not consistent, period.
Yeah. I love that you stress that point. And it's so important. Consistency is so important in just anything you do. And so I wanted to talk to you about this passage in your book, and I wanted to just ask you about it because I think it relates directly to me. You said, cool. You can and want to write in public on a regular basis. 1 time per month is barely cutting it. Twice a month, okay. 4 times a month, now you're getting somewhere. Daily, shoot me an email because I want to invest in you. So I write daily. I don't publish daily, but I post 2 blog posts currently a week and write on Twitter daily and 1 newsletter a week. So what is that investment that you're trying to invest in people? Is it just like, talk to me about that? Like if someone emails you, what does that mean?
I've actually had a couple people email me with saying that from the book. I mean, for one, in the most general sense, it's me saying, my time is valuable. Everyone's time is valuable. The busier or the harder you work and the better you get at something, the more valuable your time becomes. And so that's my way of saying to people, I, just like everyone else, I've learned from a lot of really smart people. I, just like the people who took the time to teach me, the reason they were willing to teach me was because I took the things that they shared with me and I put them into practice. I actually did them. And then when I did them, I would go back to them and say, I did the thing you told me to do. What's next? And then they'd give me something and then I'd go do it. And then I'd go back to them and I said, I did that too. What's next? And that's the definition of mentorship. And as a complete side note, because this gets misconstrued a lot, finding a mentor is not about going and asking someone to mentor you. It's about asking them one question, them giving you something to do, and then you going and doing it and proving that you actually want to learn, coming back, and then they go, cool, I'll give you another thing that you can put into practice and learn and do. And if you do that enough times over a year, 2 years, 4 years, whatever, you end up calling someone your mentor. So that package or that statement, package, I don't know why I said the word package, that statement that I had in the book was me saying, I'm willing to invest time into you if you are willing to take the things that I'm saying and you put them into practice. And if you do, shoot me an email and ask me, what's the next thing that I can do? What's the next thing that I can do? And I will tell you, but I'm not going to spend the time doing that for someone that goes, what's the answer? And then waits 3 months and doesn't do anything, because then what's the point of that?
Yeah. And I love that. And you'll be expecting an email from me in the future. But what I love about what you just said is that it's so, you think you want someone to hold your hand, but what you actually want is just someone to tell you do one thing and just do that thing and keep going. So I think people get lost in mentorship in the idea that other people don't want to mentor them. Like if you're successful, there's a good chance you want to teach someone what you know, right? But you want to teach someone who's actually going to apply it. Like it's crazy to me. You know what I mean? So it's I understand what you're saying and makes perfect sense to me. So switching gears a little bit, one of the reasons why loved your writing so much and could relate to it is because you have a history in bodybuilding. And although I'm nowhere professional or close to be professional, I've spent the last 3 years lifting weights very consistently, and it's played a huge role in developing my psyche. So talk about not only the role that bodybuilding played in your life, but also about the injury that happened that shaped your life, because this was a story that was so well written that I would love for you to talk about on this podcast.
Yeah, the infamous injury. Yeah, for context, I got into bodybuilding really when I was about 18 or 19. I didn't know that I was allergic to gluten. So I have celiac disease until I was 18. So I was really, really sick growing up. Gluten's in pretty much everything in the American diet. So I was just constantly seeing doctors, missing school, really underweight. And I didn't know until I turned 18. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is what life is like if you're normal and you don't feel like you have the flu every day. Is a dramatic shift. And one of the things, you have to remember, when I was 18, that was 2008. And nobody, like a lot of the food trends that exist today really weren't there yet. Like almond milk wasn't a thing, right? Or, like gluten-free bread. Like there was like one tiny little square of shelf space in the grocery store where it was like, here are these weird gluten-free foods that haven't caught on yet. And so as I learned that I had to shift my diet, I basically realized, and my mom pointed this out to me a lot too, because she has celiac disease as well, is, you're basically going to be eating rice, potatoes, veggies, meats, and like, that's it. It's a very, very clean diet,
Sounds like my diet.
Right. And so what happened, it was an interesting kind of identity moment, because what happened was I realized, okay, I can either spend the rest of my life just like really upset at the fact that I can't have pizza and beers with friends, right? Beer has gluten in it, pizza has gluten in it. So what am I going to do? And I kind of stumbled across the world of bodybuilding because I was looking up just things that I could eat with celiac disease. And someone, I forget, something on the internet, someone had pointed out that bodybuilding diets were very gluten-free and celiac friendly just by the nature of them, because you have to eat really clean as a bodybuilder. So that was the beginning for me. It was more of a way of taking a negative and a weakness and turning it into a positive and a strength. And so I got really into bodybuilding. Same thing I was talking about with mentorship. I got a gym membership. One of the big guys at the gym, I just kept harassing him with questions, being like, how'd you get this muscle? How do you do this? And I was the only one who kept showing up every single night, 5 p.m. I got another question. And he really took me under his wing. And because I was putting into practice the things that he was telling me, I was eating like a maniac. I was game to show up and do 2-hour, 3-hour lifts every night. I completely changed, and I put on like 70 pounds of muscle, and I looked like I had eaten my former self. And it became I like wasn't even the same person. And I did that from, I really started taking it seriously when I was about 20. And by the time I was 26, I was like, just the best shape of my entire life. And I really thought, maybe I can do something with fitness. I had written some fitness ebooks on the internet. I was writing a lot on Quora about fitness stuff. Like I really thought, because I loved lifting, that was going to be my future, even though I knew that I loved writing the same or more. And that was a really hard thing for me to figure out what I wanted to do with. And then, yeah, it was really unfortunate, but it was also, I don't know, maybe the universe telling me that it was time. But I went to the gym on my 26th birthday, and I'll obviously never forget the day because it was my birthday. And my mentor at work at the time asked me if I wanted to go out for a steak dinner, and I was like, "Nah, man, it's chest tonight." And I didn't celebrate my birthday, and I went to the gym instead, and I ended up herniating a disc in my neck, and that just changed everything. I didn't go back to the gym for 2 years, and I was on painkillers and ice for 3 months, and yet at the same time, that was also the moment, because I couldn't lift, and that made me so uncomfortable. I missed the gym. It was such a huge part of my life. My whole life was based around meals and lifts. Like that was how I structured everything. So as a way of kind of coping with that, I just went all in on writing. And that was the same time period that I basically quit my job, went all in on freelance writing. I finished my book. I ended up getting my first handful of ghostwriting clients. Next thing I knew, me and a close friend are building a company. And a year later, I'm the founder of a 7-figure ghostwriting company. And none of that could have been possible if I was still treating bodybuilding and lifting as the number one priority in my life, which it was.
And what I want to ask you about is how that felt mentally to not be in the gym for 2 years. I can't imagine going like 2 weeks without lifting weights. So, talk to me about what that did to your psyche and what it felt like to just have something be something that was a necessity to something that you physically couldn't do.
It sucked. It was really hard. And I noticed a lot of things kind of unraveled in my life and in my personality. I have a very, very obsessive personality. I also have a very addictive nature. I had substance abuse issues when I was younger, and it took me a long time to turn, like I said, that negative into a positive. And once I did, and I learned to love it, that was my way of kind of understanding the world. I have always seen the world through whatever it is that I'm connected to, whatever it is that I'm doing. And so bodybuilding for me was that, but it wasn't typical bodybuilding. There was a point in the journey where a bunch of the guys that I was around, they all made the decision that they were like, this is going to be my life. And they all started taking steroids, and, a bunch of them started competing. And those were the guys that I lifted with every single night. And it was clear to me that if I wanted to go down that road, it was there, but that was going to cost me a lot, like I was going to give up even more for that. And I didn't really know if that's what I wanted out of it. So I ultimately said no. I never took steroids. It was always more about just lifting and cultivating a mindset of discipline. That's what it really was to me. And almost every day after I would go to the gym, I would come home and meditate. And I linked the two. It was about lifting weights, but it was really about mastering myself. And for a huge chunk of that, I was 100% sober because I had just, I went to a rehab program when I was 19, and I really wanted to use lifting as a way of proving to myself that I am the captain of my soul. I am the creator of my own destiny. And so it was a bit more spiritual of a pursuit for me than it was just, I want to be shredded and I want to go compete and make this my career. So when I couldn't lift anymore, a lot of that had to go somewhere. I didn't have that vehicle anymore. And so both as a pro and a con, it went directly into my business. There's a reason why as a company we grew so quickly. We went from me and my co-founder in his apartment to 20 full-time employees and 7 figures in revenue and 60 plus clients around the world in like 18 months. That happened really quickly. And the reason was because I treated it like a sport. I treated it like 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is the only thing that I think about. And as a result, I stopped meditating. I got really unhappy. I ended up in the hospital with shingles because I was so stressed out. It impacted a lot of areas in my life. And it's only been in the past year or so and choosing to scale that business back and reconnect with lifting in a way. I can't lift the same way, but I do more yoga now and more things that just focus on me feeling good in my body. Now I'm starting to reconnect to that and go, oh, okay, kind of went off the deep end there, became a workaholic for a few years. Okay, what did we learn? And how can how can that be applied to writing and to other things that are maybe longer lasting and more meaningful?
Yeah, man, that's so fascinating that you took the meditation route and then dished it all entirely, focused entirely on building your agency. And then, so what was the point that you broke? Was it going to the hospital with shingles? And what was that like?
No, that was like the halfway point. And I think the craziest part about that was I'll never forget, I had gone to the hospital and they gave me a bunch of meds, and they basically were like, I went to the hospital like right before it started to get bad. Shingles, you get this kind of weird little rash on your abdomen, and the rash is basically a signal like, hey, underneath the skin, you're going to get this boa constrictor type feeling around your stomach and around your chest, because all of those nerve cells are going to be activated and inflamed. I'm also not a doctor, so the way I'm explaining this is probably not scientifically true, but that's what it feels like, right? And so they at the hospital, they basically were like, this is about to hurt a lot. So here's painkillers, here's some meds, and basically good luck for the next 30 days because you're going to go on a little roller coaster. And it was exactly that. I mean, we were in full scaling mode. I was on Vicodin while still trying to like hold interviews for new employees. And I was running workshops and I was talking to clients, and I was still working like 12 hours a day while my body was like, you need to chill. And I got on this call with these other guys, and these are more like seasoned entrepreneurs. And I had to like postpone our last call because I went to the hospital, and they were like, hey, Cole, like, what's been up? And I was like, oh, just standard everyday life. Like, I just went to the hospital with shingles. And literally, like, all three of the guys on this call, like, laughed. Like, these are older dudes. They're just, like, in their 40s and 50s and stuff. And they're like, oh, yeah, like, looks like you're a real entrepreneur now. And I was like, this is their way of basically saying, like, you're paying your dues. Like, we all have gone through this because this is what it means to be an entrepreneur. And it was this very weird feeling where I was like, on the one hand, I'm in a lot of pain and I'm really disappointed in myself that I've become a just full-fledged workaholic. And the other part of me is like proud. And I'm like, oh, wow, look at me. This is an achievement. I'm so stressed out that I got myself sick. And that was a moment for me where I was like, something about this is not guiding me in the right direction, but I'm so deep in that I don't really know what to do about it. The moment of change came like a year and a half later, where so many things had happened in our business, and we were growing, and then we weren't growing, and just, I mean, it was, it's entrepreneurship. And my girlfriend convinced me to work remotely in Mexico for a month. She had been working at a huge company. They just did a massive layoff. She was unfortunately one of the people that got laid off. Gave her a severance package, and she was like, I want to travel. You need to take some time off. Why don't we go to Mexico for a month? And of course, I fought her on it, and I didn't want to go. And I was like, I can't step away from the business right now. And our whole company was remote. So the reality was I could just grab my laptop and I could. So eventually we talked about it enough, and I said, fine, I'll go. So we go to Mexico, and like 3 weeks in, I would work during the week, and then on the weekends we would like explore and, check it out. And the third weekend we went to this lagoon called Bacalar, and we stayed in this like really just, little shack on the beach. And it was on the side of this lagoon, and, no AC, one room. But it was right on the water. And the water was crystal clear, as warm as a bath. It was incredible. And the first day we put all our stuff in this little shack, and we both go jump in the lagoon, and we both just kind of lay there for a while. And I'm laying in this lagoon, and I'm like, that was the moment where I was like, I'm really unhappy. Like, what am I doing? Why am I building this? There's no real exit for me. It's just more clients, more revenue, more employees, over and over again. What am I aiming toward? And we came back from that trip, and I had a conversation with my co-founder, and I was like, dude, I can't do this anymore. So we scaled the whole business back. Now him and I just work with a small handful of clients, and I can actually get back to writing my own things and what I had originally set out to do. But it took a long time, man. It took a long time to get to that conclusion. And now that's something that I write about often, and I talk about it often, because especially in entrepreneurship, but any pursuit, this happens in sports, this happens in music, this happens in everything, is you get so obsessed with what you're working on that at a certain point you lose sight of why you started it. And then you stop questioning whether or not that's actually the thing that you really wanted to do. And for me, it wasn't.
It's powerful. And it's almost like one question that pops out is, when you were sitting on that lagoon and just relaxing, were you meditating at that time?
I'm probably just without even realizing it, but yeah, man, it was such a, I can like still just feel it. It was, you're just in this body of water. The craziest thing to me was we went out for dinner later that night, and the server, who was just, he's great, and was just telling us about the food and local stuff, and he was educating us on the lagoon, and he said people travel and come to this place from all over the world because the lagoon is believed to have healing properties.
Wow.
And I was just like tripping out listening to him talk about it, because that's how I felt. It was like the moment I jumped in the water, it was like somebody just shook my consciousness and was like, you are not on the right path. You now know that. What you choose to do with that information is up to you,
Mm-hmm. It's crazy. And I totally believe in stuff like that. And it's really interesting how just when we stop for a second, whatever we're doing, if we just stop and think of nothing, the answer comes to us, right? It's like, it's
usually
crazy, right? Like, we're so involved in the actions all the time that when we take a shower, when we start driving, doing nothing, when we're sitting in a lagoon, then we all of a sudden have the answer for what we should be doing. It's fascinating how that works out. So I was going to ask you, man, about lessons you learned from building your agency and scaling it back, but you it seems like you touched on that a lot. Is there anything you didn't mention about building your agency and lessons you learned?
Man, I mean, well, we could talk for hours about lessons learned. I mean, everything from specific business lessons, I think building a company, that was something I kept telling myself, was as stressed out as I got, as difficult as the journey was. I just turned 30. I was in my 20s, and to spend 26 to 29 basically just fully immersed in building a company, my rationalization was like, I'm young, and the amount that I'm learning is it's gonna fundamentally change my whole trajectory in life. It had nothing to do with money for me. Most things have nothing to do with money. I'm a lot more drawn to learning and the curiosity of it, because I know that if you can learn the skill, then the money is always there. You can always monetize the skill. The problem is most people don't put in the time and effort and energy and focus to actually acquire the skill. So I knew that building a company would teach me things that I'd carry with me for the rest of my life. But the bigger lessons for me were a lot more around just life, fulfillment, happiness, the things that, like it. For example, it took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that I was like, maybe I don't want to be a startup founder. Maybe that's not what I want. Maybe I'm never going to build a $1 billion company. Maybe that's okay. And I think in that, it then allowed me to ask the second question, which was, did you ever really want that in the first place? Or what are you chasing? Or what is it that you were trying to get through all of this? Because the reality is, I've always known I just love writing. I'm very, very happy when it's just me sitting in a room playing with words. And so to know that so clearly, and yet to simultaneously build a life where I had no silence and I had no time to myself. There's a disconnect there. So why was I doing that? So those are more the questions that I take away from the journey, and that have really informed now what I think the next chapter is. 30 to 40 is a big area of time, and I want to spend that time really deliberately, because I just saw how quickly 3 years of your life can go by.
One thing that I've been thinking about recently is how the pre-COVID versus post-COVID time in America. And what I mean by that is, pre-COVID, the things that we were thinking about were more, this is very generally speaking, but I'm curious to hear what you think about this. It's pre-COVID, we were thinking about growth. How can we go faster, bigger, stronger? How can we get to the next level? How can we hit the next revenue target? Post-COVID, it's like we understand the importance of our loved ones, the importance of spending time, the importance of living intentionally and doing the things that you want to be doing. Does that relate at all to your journey? Does that make sense to you? What do you think about it?
I think so. I mean, it's also worth acknowledging that, America's on the capitalist train. I think that no matter what, even if there's this pause right now, habits are habits. The moment that we go back, whether or not you believe there's ever a going back, right? But like, as soon as it's okay to go right back to the mentality of, yeah, I'm out all the time, I'm working all the time, like that's what's going to happen, because that's our society. But yeah, I've noticed just in a lot of ways even over the past 6 months, like my own relationships have gotten closer in a different sort of way. Other relationships have gotten more distant just because you can't see people as often, or it's just not the same. But I was thinking about this the other day, just in terms of like, even looking at the things that I've valued this year, like, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm basically in sweatpants like every single day. Right. So I mean, I don't go shopping. I very rarely take trips. I used to travel like minimum twice a month on a plane. Like, I used to travel a lot for work, to see other people. I haven't really traveled this year. So it's just been a shift and an opportunity to slow down, and then when you do slow down, you kind of realize what's most important. Like, once again, as almost every other chapter of my life has revealed, like, I really don't need a lot. What makes me happy is just waking up and, having some tea or coffee and sitting down and writing. And so as I have really started to realize that again over the past 6 months, it's like everything should be optimizing that then. If you take away everything else, if the world shuts down for a year and that's where you find your happiness, then why aren't you optimizing for that all the time?
Mm-hmm. It's powerful, and it's true, and it's about understanding yourself. Do you think that you needed to have gone through what you've gone through to realize that, or do you think that you could have figured that out, just by starting that way?
It's always kind of been true. I loved writing as a kid. I loved writing. I mean, when I was a competitive gamer as a teenager, I was also one of the first teenage bloggers on the internet. Or when I was in bodybuilding, I wrote about lifting and mindset and all those things the entire time. Like, writing's always been a piece of the journey. And I think it's only been until recently building a business changed it for me, because I've always tied writing directly with whatever other thing I'm pursuing. So when I was pursuing being a professional gamer, I wrote about gaming. When I was pursuing bodybuilding, I wrote about bodybuilding. And same thing with advertising, and same thing with entrepreneurship. And there's something different that happens. I've talked about this a lot with my co-founder as well. There's something different that happens with your brain once you've built a business. It doesn't need to be $1 billion company. It's just once you build a business that works in some capacity, you basically start to realize the game of society, and you understand how value gets moved around, and you understand how to create things that people want, that they're willing to pay for, and you understand how to leverage either labor or capital to grow the thing that you're building. And all of a sudden it's not this big question mark of like, how do I do things in life? You understand the game generally. And once you understand the game, then it becomes a question of, well, what do I really want to do with that knowledge? And how am I using it? What do I think that power is for? So yeah, I think in many ways I did need to go through it, because building a business was kind of the last step on that journey of understanding when you're pursuing something, how do you build it? But it was also the most socially acceptable and validated one. Like same thing as a teenager, it's not really the coolest thing to be like, I'm obsessed with playing World of Warcraft and I'm the best at it. Like nobody really cares, and same thing with bodybuilding. Like, I don't know, it is kind of more mainstream and becoming more and more mainstream, but the reality is it's still a niche sport. There's a lot of people that look at bodybuilders and are like, that's kind of freakish. I'm actually not attracted to that. I don't want that. So building a business was the first time that I had done something where basically everyone in society is like, you're a business owner, dope. And so once you get that validation, then it raises this really big question for you, which is like, okay, well, if I did the thing that essentially gets the most validation from the most number of people in society, then and I realize that doesn't fill this void in me, right? It doesn't really like change you as a person. You're just doing that, and that's your title, and that's how people see you. Then what else matters? What do you really want to do? And I think that was the moment where I was like, oh, well, what I really want to do is write, but maybe my ego loves saying that I have all this responsibility being a business owner,
And it's so fascinating. It reminds me of what Jim Carrey said. He said, if you're, everyone should try to become rich and famous to understand that isn't the answer, right? It's like,
that's exactly it. Yeah. And again, just to clarify, by no means am I saying, hey, look at me, I've achieved all this fame and fortune. Like in the grand scheme of things, it was a very small venture. I've done very small things, but at the same time, they all share the same common thread, and the lesson is universal. So if you can learn that lesson in 3 years building one company, that's amazing. If you can learn that lesson, spending 20 years building a publicly traded company, like that's also amazing. It's just, what does it mean to you? And when you have that moment, how does that inform your actions? What do you choose to do with it?
Before we wrap this up, Nicolas, is there any final pieces of parting wisdom you can give the listeners of this podcast? It's been such an insightful conversation for me, and I'm so grateful for it.
Man, I love talking about stuff like this, so we could go on for hours. But I think the big thing that I've found myself thinking about a lot recently is really, really, truly understanding what direction you're moving yourself in. I think a lot of times it's actually hard to know. People think, am I moving in the direction of success, right? Or am I moving in the direction of failure? Like they'll make it that black and white, but it's really not about that. It's, am I moving in a direction where every single day I am connected to the thing that really, really matters to me? And if each of those days compound on themselves, what exponential result can I be excited to unlock in myself over time? And that takes a lot of slowing down and a lot of clarity to really unpack and understand, based on your actions today, what direction are you really steering yourself in tomorrow?
Some insightful stuff, man. Where can people find you on the internet?
Oh, well, Quora, Medium, Twitter, Nicolas Cole 77. Hit me up through my site. Like we talked about earlier, I really try and I'm a big believer in paying it forward and, helping the next person. So I encourage people that have questions or are working on their own writing or their own pursuits, shoot me an email. I'll try and respond to all of them.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and it's been an absolute pleasure, man.
Thanks for having me.
That was my conversation with Nicolas Cole. If you enjoyed this conversation, as always, let me know on Twitter at HeyDannyMiranda is the best place to let me know. I appreciate you listening until the final seconds, and I'll see you guys in the next one.